Theology. So great to have you here, Dr. Greg Garrett. And, we are here today to, if you're new to Masala Chai theology is the space where we essentially reconstruct a more ancient, liberative, Jesus-centered, empire-resisting faith that essentially might be a little spicy. It might add a little spice to the spice palette in the best ways possible, shake things up a little bit. And this is certainly what your book, White Lies, absolutely does. I really enjoyed reading this. It really does help that you're an expert in literature. You're the chair of the literature department at Baylor University. But I was truly astounded by your humility, the way you brought yourself to a conversation about race as an ally. This book is White Lies, Dismantling 10 Cultural Myths About Race. And then you've got these chapters where you take on these cultural lies, these myths, and, center of Black neighbors. You quote experts, and you do this as a Southern white American gentleman, as the demographic that should be doing the most amount of work around this, and you show a way forward. So thank you for writing this book, and welcome to Masala Chai Theology.
Oh, you're so very welcome. It is so good to see you, my brother. And it feels like we have so many things in common. This Jesus-centered love for all of God's people. We discovered the other day that we have the same remarkable agent. Yeah. And, my comment to you is it feels like we are brothers from another mother. And, this is our first time face to face, but I am so happy to be with you because I got to ask you some questions about your book, The Justice of Jesus, right, which is a remarkable book. And we have a lot of theologians in common, people that we love. And you almost broke me when you brought in Blessed Rachel Held Evans, who was a friend of mine and whose loss resonates throughout American Christianity. So to be on with one of my favorite post-colonial theologians is a great thing. So I'm so glad to see you. Welcome to everybody who's watching us live or will watch us later. And I'm so excited about our conversation. Thank you.
Yeah. No, me too. You've, and that's very kind. Thank you for sharing your kind words of encouragement. I see Morgan Strello here in our chat. Morgan's our shared agent, the publishing mother to our books that we have in common, if you will. But Dr. Garrett, you. I just have so many questions about your journey leading up to the book. You mentioned in the book that I think something else we have in common is this too, that, we both came to faith again in some way in a Black church setting where the Black church saved our faith, and we're indebted. We owe this debt of gratitude to the Black Christian tradition in America. Tell us a little more about that personal journey for you, because looking at you, no one would assume that you would have had a journey like that. And I'm always, as a priest, fascinated by spiritual journeys. So tell us more.
Well, first, just the symbol of all of this is I grew up in the Southern Baptist tradition where we clapped on the 1 and the 3, white person style. And you would not know it to look at me, but now I clap on the 2 and the 4, which is the offbeat. And that is the spiciness. I just got off a call with a journalist from London, Maddie Fry. And she's an old friend of mine and loves conversations about religion, culture, and wanted to talk about this book, which will be released in England in October. And the last question, or one of the last questions she asked me before I got on with you, I was talking about, despair is too strong a word because if you're a person who lives in Christian hope, despair is a thing that I don't want to lean into. But this feels like a very dark time, in terms of anti-democratic backsliding and increased racism and anti-immigrant sentiments. And she asked me, do you ever get mad at God? And I said, I got mad at God because I didn't realize that I was actually mad at the people of God. The manifestation the presentation of God that, I had gotten through these Southern Baptist churches in Georgia and North Carolina and Oklahoma. And, so I fled from that for many years, as James Baldwin talks about, after he left the church of his youth, where he was like a star teenage preacher. And I was fortunate enough to find this church in East Austin, Texas. And there are a set of life circumstances that surround this, and I'll be very brief about it because I've written about this at some length. But at the darkest moments of my life, when I was suffering from life-threatening depression, I was rescued by a historically Black church in East Austin. And, we talk about Holy Spirit moments. I didn't know what I was doing there. I had sworn I would never set foot in the doors of a church again. But I was rescued by this church and loved back to life and given a framework that I had always believed should be there, that faith that's not married to justice is dead. That, Dr. King talked about an irrelevant social club. And so this church rescued me 20 some years ago, sent me off to seminary. And when the rector of my church said, "We think you are supposed to go to seminary," I said, "That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard." And then I did it. Wow. Because we discern in community. And so I was given this opportunity to, as you write about in your book, understand ways that the Black church experience and Black theology could reshape the vision that I'd been given of God. And to live into more of this sense of justice. So there was an icon of Dr. King on the walls of St. James Episcopal Church. And that for me, and clapping on the 2 and the 4, is sort of emblematic of who I have become as a person of faith. Race has always been an important issue for me since I grew up in the Deep South. And I am some years older than you. And the schools that I was in Georgia and North Carolina had just been integrated. And so from a very early age, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, I had the opportunity to see how my Black classmates were treated by administrators and by teachers, and it was different. And I didn't have a language for it, theological or otherwise, but children have a firm grasp on the concept of fairness and unfairness. My daughters, when they were tiny, would say, "That's not fair." And that's what I felt in my heart. And so all those years I was out of the church, I was teaching Dr. King and James Baldwin and Frederick Douglass and Maya Angelou, and, experiencing what they had gone through. But then being a part of the Black church not only taught me the theology, but it put me in relationship. And you talk a lot about Jemar Tisby in your book. I talk a lot about him in my book. He's one of my formative influences. And Jemar talks about how it's not enough just to acknowledge the injustice. You've got to be in relationship with the people who are affected by it. And that leads you to a place of commitment. And this book is part of my commitment after being in relationship and learning and loving from people who are outside the white Christian church tradition.
Yeah. So good. I mean, I'm so glad you brought that up because, I know you and I have a lot of friends across the ecumenical spectrum. We're both ordained ministers in Anglican traditions. And, the reality is we have friends in marginalized communities, or at least I do, who sometimes are a bit upset when, men or white men come along writing works on allyship. But, I think the reality is that there's a healthy way of modeling allyship, and it's through relationship. And I think you do this so well in your book. And even having context into our online friendship over a few years now, seeing the mutual friends we share, watching you work collaboratively with another Black decolonial scholar I cite in my book, Anthony Reddy, and your friendship with him, the stuff you do together in the UK. All of that is formative. It shapes you, and it doesn't become about a transaction or platform anymore. It becomes about stewardship, and that's what I see here. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. And a part of it is I had been content to sort of walk alongside people of color, Black people. During the Black Lives Matter movement, there were a lot of people talking about allyship. And my friend Kelly Brown Douglas, who's been one of the most important formational people for me, the great womanist theologian, posted something on Twitter, which I'm always going to call it. And basically what she had posted on Twitter was, white people, I don't want you to be my ally. And that kind of rocked me a little bit, because I thought that was my role. And like, I had been very clear, when I think about race, when I speak about race, preach about race, it's like, I want to be very clear, here is my lane. I am a white, straight Christian male who sees these things in the culture and has to speak about it. But I asked her if we could have a conversation, and it was deep in the hard lockdown. And so where you see me today is the corner of my bedroom, where I spent the pandemic. So like basically in my bedroom, 23 hours a day. It was horrifying.
Wow.
But I said, could you clarify that for me? Because like, I am learning so much from you, and I know that you love me and will speak the truth, even if it's a hard truth. And so we set up a call, and because, we're liturgical people and we create space for events that is sacred. I said, I'm not going to take your call from the Zoom section of my bedroom. I'm going to take it from my bathtub. And Jeannie, my wife, always wants me to clarify so that nobody gets terrible images in their head. I was completely clothed, but I like the bathtub. And, there are certain places when you go there, and something good happens. When I walk in the doors of St. James, something good happens. And so I lay down fully clothed in the bathtub, took Kelly's call. And what she said to me, and I hope our white audiences will hear this without feeling confronted by it, because Kelly is a person who will always speak the truth, and she does it in love, and I believe that she and I are good friends. But what she said to me was basically this. She said, Greg, when you tell me that you want to be my ally, you're saying that you want to walk beside me, or maybe a little bit behind me, while I solve a problem that I caused. But Greg, I didn't cause this problem. You did. And, scales fell from my eyes. That is an exponential leap in responsibility, but it is also, hang on, that's my wife calling, and she should not
be. Do your thing, please.
She knows I'm in this call. and so when she said that to me, I realized that I was going to have to take a step forward. And do something different than I had ever done before. And it's not comfortable.
Right.
I am a super shy person. And I know it wouldn't be obvious from all the things that I do, but like, I am a capital I introvert. No, Siri, don't talk to me either. When she said that back to me in 2020, I said, I'm going to have to step up my game in order to love these people that I love better and to speak out into a culture. And there is a chapter in the book about the myth of the white savior. And one of the things that I think is really important about the myth of the white savior is that it can be deployed on the left and the right. So you may remember that I write about Matthew McConaughey, who is, a fellow Austinite, who I believe is a genuinely good person, moral person who wants to do the right thing on race, and who has also taken roles as a white savior, which is basically the thing where a white person makes decisions for a person of color. without real consultation about it.
Mm.
And so on the left, it can be out of, I want to do the right thing because I love these people. And on the right, it can be one of several myths that I write about in the book, which is, I know more than you do, or I'm a more elevated human than you are. And so I should make decisions. And I don't want to be in that role of white savior. But what I do want to do is represent the Christian faith that you and I share, the call to justice, and also particularly as someone who lives in an America that I'm super disappointed in. I'm super disappointed with 31% of Americans. I want to believe that not only can we realize that every person is a child of God, but believe in that whole Pledge of Allegiance thing about liberty and justice for all. And, it's hierarchical for me in terms of my belief. Like, I am a Christian far before I'm an American or a Democrat or whatever else there might be. But this book was a way for me to take the skills that I have, the gifts that I have, the connections and collaborations that I've been a part of, and deploy them in such a way that we could ask people to tell the truth about what they actually believe.
So good. So good. No, thank you for that. And again, I really think if you're a white person who cares about racial injustice, wants to learn about allyship, from someone else who's embodying this well, I think this is an incredible resource to be reading, engaging in, learning from. I'm really curious about some of these myths that you directly take on throughout this book. You've 10 myths that you take on, 10 chapters, one for each myth, which you call a lie outright, a white lie. Which one of these, and all of these are so profound and backed by receipts, and I love that you bring your literature background into this. You go into James Baldwin and, a lot of Black literature. You draw wisdom from there in a humble way. But I'm really curious from your own journey, which one of these lies, which one of these myths were the biggest one? What was the biggest one for you to confront, take on, that you then felt a depth and abundance of wisdom and offering from your own journey in this book?
It's got to be the third chapter, which is on the lost cause myth. So as somebody who grew up in the Deep South as a male, I was entranced by the myth of the Confederacy. And so at the same time as I am looking at the way that my Black classmates are being treated, I am also being sucked into the myth of the noble South, the graceful warrior, the lords and ladies. The opening crawl in Gone with the Wind is about, there once was this land of chivalry and blah, 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 blah. And all of that is gone with the wind. And, Shelby Foote, the Mississippi historian, said in Ken Burns' Civil War series, first episode, he said, "Lost things are always prized very highly." And so there was this sense that this was, as one of the people that I interviewed, General Ty Seidule, military historian from the South as well, this was just the water we swam in. And it was intoxicating. And one of the things that happens with the lost cause myth is that it elevates every white person. And so if you can diminish the way that you're thinking about enslaved people, or say that the Civil War, American Civil War, was not about slavery, which it absolutely was, as the Confederate leaders said when they left the country. But if you can say it wasn't about this, it was about states' rights, or it was about a way of life, or it was about this or that, then you can live into this kind of false aristocracy. And all the myths that I write about, one of my favorite contemporary writers about race is Van Newkirk from The Atlantic. And he and I were on a program together during the pandemic. We were Zooming.
Hmm.
And he said, myth is just something that people in power use to perpetuate their power.
Hmm.
And Malcolm X says something very similar in the autobiography, where he talks about racism being a tool.
Hmm.
And tools are meant to create profit for the people
Hmm.
who own them, if you will. So it took me a long time to disassociate myself from that myth because it was so attractive.
Hmm.
And I talk a lot about cognitive dissonance these days.
Hmm.
So you can at the one time look at Thomas Jefferson, who says all men are created equal. It's an aspirational thing. And then when you go to the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and I've got my uh,
Hmm.
Namak shirt on today. In the basement of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, there's a kind of classical sculpture of Jefferson.
Hmm.
And then the sculptor has put a bunch of boxes behind him,
Yeah.
hundreds of boxes representing each of the human beings that Thomas Jefferson owned during the course of his lifetime.
Wow.
And so I think one of the things that this book is about is acknowledging the cognitive dissonance. And I think it is largely directed towards the kind of people that Dr. King would think of as people of good conscience.
Hmm.
There are plenty of people over on the Twitter who hate the very concept of this book and think of me as woke and weak and a race traitor, which fine, sure. There are people who will not acknowledge this set of myths as accurate because to do so would require their confronting it in some way.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I was on the John Fugelsang show a couple of weeks
Yeah.
ago before I went to Colorado, and he was awesome. And listeners, if you have not seen his book, Separation of Church and Hate, which just won an American Book Award, it's an astonishing book, smart, funny. He is speaking out of Matthew 25 and all the justice stuff that the two of us care so deeply about.
Yeah.
But I knew that the project of this book was to hold these myths up to the light,
Hmm.
and I've known that even from the point of proposing the book. But what I said on John's show the other day is like, imagine that I'm going down to your basement and I discover a monster down there cuddled up next to the furnace. And I
Hmm.
bring it back up and I put it on your kitchen table. And there are a couple of various reactions you can have to that. Like one of them could be, huh, which is not a great reaction.
Hmm.
Or it could be, oh my God, get that out of here. I don't ever want to see that again.
Hmm.
Or it could also be, oh, that's Ted. He's been
Hmm.
down there a good long time, and I'm okay with that.
Hmm.
And so I think for people who are happy with Ted, this is not going to be a book that shapes them unless some piece of their life
Hmm.
unravels and they have to think about it. But
Hmm.
I also do believe that there are enough people of good conscience, that 60 whatever percent of people who did not vote for Donald Trump
Hmm.
in the last election. All of those people who are trying to deconstruct and reconstruct their faith so that it's less about white supremacy and more about justice for all, the justice of Jesus. But that has been personally the myth that I've had to wrestle with most, the myth about the Confederacy and the lost cause. And then the important thing about it is it's also the root of what's going on with white Christian nationalism
Hmm.
in America right now. And so I talk in the introduction about on January 6th, this picture of a white supremacist parading the Confederate battle flag outside the Senate chamber.
Hmm.
And that for me is one of the most formative things in my writing of this book. It broke me.
Hmm.
It broke me. And I was like, I cannot believe that in 2020, 2021, this is even possible. But it is that myth of white superiority carried over into the present and anointed by a lot of kinds of conservative Christianity.
Hmm.
Very conservative Catholics, very conservative evangelicals, and
Yeah.
many of those people are not actually faithful Christians. But
Mm.
in Trump's America, evangelical has become a cultural marker. So even if I don't go to church, I'm going to call myself a white Christian evangelical
Mm.
because that fits with a model that puts me on top of whatever pyramid there is.
Wow. 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 No, I appreciate you and your honest reckoning with all of that. And one of the things I actually really appreciate about this book is that, um, this isn't someone, this isn't another book bashing conservative Trump supporters. This really isn't that. What this is an invitation to a journey of transformation, a journey of stewarding privilege well, by reckoning with deeply, deeply embedded truths that, lies, deeply embedded lies that have presented themselves as truths to white folks. And as I say in my book, progressives, evangelicals have
Yeah,
a lot
evangelicals.
of decolonization to do too, because you've been conditioned by these same lies, these same empire-shaped frameworks. So, one of the this isn't one of the lies that you underline in this book, but I think a core premise of this book that you introduce at the introduction is that diversity challenges white power.
Yeah.
Diversity challenges white power in any space, progressive or conservative, where white folks are in the majority. When you add some masala to it, when you
Yeah.
add,
Yeah.
an element of diversity there, it spices things up. And yes, it leads to more. It can lead to more rejuvenation, but it can also lead to questions, concerns, pushback, donors pulling their money out, all that stuff, right? Because power is challenged. And I want to ask you about this because, this is one of those books that I couldn't read without bringing my full self and my full life
Oh, of
experience
course.
as a person of color who's lived in the South, in both conservative and progressive spaces. And I see these frameworks everywhere where, and again, I appreciate you calling out so much of Black experience here, just things like feeling unseen until you're seen as a threat. I've experienced that as a brown person. I think that very much is how immigrants are experienced today. But even, I've noticed that when we bring our full selves, people say, hey, we want diversity, come on in. But then that equity and inclusion aren't taken seriously. And it's almost like we had this trend a few years ago because it was a trendy thing to do in a lot of circles, including progressive circles. But now it almost feels like no one really gives a hoot about it anymore, right? And so I'm curious, your thoughts, reactions to all of that.
Well, it reminds me of some of the things that I've heard Jamar Tisby say. And he's been at Baylor a bunch of times, and we are so grateful to have been able to welcome him because he's not very welcome in conservative Christian spaces anymore.
Mm.
And one of the things that he talks about is, do they just say they want diversity,
Mm.
or do they want you and your opinions and your lived experience? And what I hear you saying, and my observation, so I came back to faith in a place where Black theology and Black church practice and Black spirituals, every time we do a baptism, we sing wade in the water,
Mm.
children. And so for me, I have not been in a space where, it's almost the reverse where my own faith journey has taken me. But I know from a whole bunch of people, including Jamar, that often people are invited into this space to represent, and this would be another myth, I would think,
Mm.
the myth of the diverse church,
Mm.
the myth of the welcome table, the myth of the rainbow people of God, where
Mm.
it's not actually being practiced. And
Mm.
you and I both want to live into the welcome table and the
Mm.
rainbow people of God that Desmond Tutu wrote about. But I think so often what happens, especially in an evangelical kind of mega church setting, is we want to pretend, but the power structures are going to stay the same.
Right.
And your lived experience is not ultimately going to be welcomed. And that's what Jamar is talking about. I remember one of the talks that he gave at Baylor where he said, ultimately you're probably going to have to leave that setting. And when you leave loud. And I do think that there was, and I want to believe, because, I want to exercise some Christian charity, that people thought they wanted these things. But then once people of color, gay and trans people, whatever, walked in the door, they began to realize that they were going to have to change and their institution was going to have to change. And people don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I love so much about St. James. So I want to tell a little story about this, because what's remarkable about St. James is that they made the choice to change, and that change has affected so many people over the decades. So St. James was founded as a Black Episcopal church at a time when Black people in Austin couldn't go to white churches. And some decades after the founding, white people started showing up, and Asian people started showing up, and gay people started showing up. And the founders of the church had a meeting, and this is part of the lore of St. James. And what they had to consider at that meeting is, what do we do about this? If we welcome these people, it's going to change who we are. And one of the mothers of the church, and I imagine her in her immaculate Sunday dress and Sunday hat, stood up and said, "We know what it feels like to be rejected. And God forgive us if we ever reject anyone who walks in the door of this church."
Wow.
And, so that decision decades before I walked in the door of the church saved my life. Because I walked in at a time where I didn't feel welcome on the planet or even welcome in my own body. And I was welcomed over and over and over again by the people of that church. And on that first Sunday that I was there, the rector, Greg Rickle, was up at the altar. And this has actually become a part of our liturgy. Don't tell the Episcopal Church. But right before, so after the consecration of the elements, we say, wherever you are in your walk of faith, you are welcome at this table. And I don't think Greg knew that he was saving my life. I don't think the people of St. James knew that they were saving my life. But over the years, the fact that they were willing to say, we will welcome everybody, even though it means that we're not who we were. And I think that is, it is such a huge part of who I am and what I do. And I get asked a lot, and I'm not saying this in any kind of self-congratulatory way, but people who are genuinely confused, it's like, you're white, right? You're like, oh, I am well aware. There is a whole lot of white me, but I was shaped by that ethos and taught that everybody belongs and everybody matters. And, taught that by St. James, taught that by James Baldwin. And I can't not live out that reality in the way I do my work. And so whether that's writing or teaching or whatever, I believe in the welcome table. And so I hope that has shaped my desire to say, let's tell better stories.
Yeah.
Let's put away these stories that are harmful and cruel, and tell stories that acknowledge the relationship that we all have.
So good. Yeah. And I'm also curious, what would you say to a white leader with institutional authority, power in a church setting or a ministry setting or organizational setting where they're like, hey, we want more diversity, but aren't necessarily fully aware of what it could cost them. Or maybe they're grappling with it. They're trying to be inclusive towards folks bringing that diversity. What wisdom would you have to offer to them as an institutional leader, as an organizational leader yourself, in the sense of, here's why it's still worth it. Here's why you need it. Any encouragement for those folks to keep going despite the pushback they're getting right now?
Well, I'm going to tell you a story about Mississippi in just a
Yeah.
second, but I am so encouraged. I'm here in Texas, and one of our Senate candidates is a person who is the most corrupt um, politician in recent Texas history,
Mm.
and the other is a seminarian
Yeah.
who became nationally famous and went viral for preaching
Mm.
about God's mercy, God's love, about Matthew 25, and whatever you have done to the least of these, you have done to me. And so I think of myself more and more as a Matthew 25 Christian. Like I want the T-shirt.
Yeah.
Maybe we could promote that together. But what you are asking is largely a question about what I'm going to call political courage, even if we're talking about religious institutions, because it is about how do we confront the fact that if we actually live into the things we say we believe, we could lose power, we could lose influence. And here's where the Mississippi story comes in. And I will tell this because it's one of my favorite stories. Whenever somebody asks me, do you have hope? Even in this moment where things look kind of dark in America, I have spoken in Mississippi and throughout the Deep South to largely white churches and white church organizations. And so the Episcopal Diocese of Mississippi asked me to come in and speak at their clergy conference. And Josh, it will not surprise you to know that I was in a room with 100 white guys. And one of my friends from seminary actually picked me up at the airport in Jackson, Mississippi. And dear friend of mine, 1 year behind me in seminary. And he picked me up, threw my bag in the back of his truck. And we got off, we're listening to music. And then he turns to me and he says, I hope you don't expect anything to happen this weekend. Which, as you know, when you're invited in to speak, that's exactly the thing that you're hoping, that nothing will happen, that, I traveled and, took off, landed. I was terrified in the air and for no reason at all. But what he said to me very simply was what I understood in my head to be a Mississippi reality. Like I was being brought in to talk about racism and anti-racism, to talk about Christian teachings on justice. I was showing a film. We were doing some workshop stuff. I was preaching. We were going to drink some beer and eat some barbecue. And so I was with them for a weekend. But as he was driving me to Meridian, where the clergy conference was going to be, he said, people are terrified. I mean, there are some of us who are ready to die in this ditch. But our bishop is not. And so many of us know that if we lean into this anti-racism work, we're going to lose members. And some of those members are foundational to our church. And, I don't serve in a parish. So I don't have to worry about upsetting a big donor.
Yeah.
But people in parishes on Sunday have to balance that cognitive dissonance. Again, here's what I believe, and here's also the reality I see. So we get to the church in Meridian, where the clergy conference is going to be held. And if our listeners want to know about Mississippi, this is a church in Mississippi where famously 3 civil rights workers gave a talk about voter registration and drove away from the church and were kidnapped and killed by the Ku Klux Klan.
Goodness, I remember the story.
Those 3 civil rights workers, 2 white Jewish, 1 black, and they drove off into the night and were killed. I mean, it's ground zero, right, for racism. And so we spend the weekend together and we do some stuff, and we get to the last day, and we're doing a closing Eucharist before we all depart from Meridian. And I am sitting next to the person sort of in charge of beloved community work in Mississippi. And he and I are just kind of looking at each other. It's like, did anything happen? Did anything happen? And then the Bishop of Mississippi gets up to give the homily. And there's a long pause, and like hush falls over the room, and you're like, something is about to happen. Like spirit is in this space. And so he talks about going to the Civil Rights Museum in Jackson and seeing this wall of heroes. And he said, there were people in those photos wearing clerical collars, but none of them were from the Episcopal Church in Mississippi.
Wow.
And then he said, it is time and past time for us to start talking about race. And I know we are going to lose some members, and that is okay. Because God is in that space, and that is the space we need to be in. And Josh, I looked around that nave, that sanctuary,
wow,
and almost all of us were in tears. And whenever somebody asks me, I mean, racism is so entrenched in American culture, in the American church. White supremacy is the loudest and most hateful voice, even though it's a small percentage of American Christians.
Yeah.
But I saw that happen. I was in the room, as they say in Hamilton. And then I will also tell you that when Bishop Siege retired, the Diocese of Mississippi elected a Black woman as their next bishop.
Wow.
I still believe. Like, I could not get up in the morning if I did not believe that Spirit was moving, that God was moving, that as James Baldwin said at the end of his life, I know one thing, and that is that we can do better.
Wow. Oh, that's so good. Thank you for that. I think I needed that hope right now. And, you know, and especially, I mean, I'll take my mask off a little bit here from host to just, bringing my full self. The reality is so much of the theological work that people of color do is going to rock the boat because it's from very different lived experiences. And you can't invite people of color to say, you can't invite them to bring their full selves and not expect to be made a little uncomfortable by our theological perspectives, right? But like our theologies are existential to us. Like, if we don't talk about these harmful theological frameworks, they harm us. They harm our communities. They harm, just yesterday, there was a U.S. senator who called Zoran Mamdani a cockroach because he's from a Muslim community, right? In the year of our Lord 2026, this is happening. And this kind of dehumanizing language leads to hate crimes, not just against folks like Zoran Mamdani. I'm a brown man in Canada, and I appreciate being a priest, being able to travel now in my collar and cross because I get to hide behind it as a brown man who's unassimilated and have a little bit of safety there. So again, I think it's so important to have folks like you remind others who look like you, who have power like you, that, hey, there is a cost to this. And, I do this too. In chapter 2 of my book is the cost of just discipleship, right? But again, to actually hear someone who's reckoned with that cost as an institutional leader, who's engaged with other institutional leaders who have reckoned with that cost and saying, yeah, this is the assignment. This is what it means to be a follower of Jesus. It should cost you something. So thank you for that. Yeah.
No, that is the assignment. And I think that there are a bunch of people of goodwill, a bunch of people that Dr. King would call people of good conscience. And I actually do think that as hard as the last 18 months have been in America, that there is also this kind of growing awareness. When somebody says out loud that a politician from another party, a person of color, person from another faith is a cockroach, Twitter will amplify their voices because of the hateful algorithms.
Mm.
But we also have the opportunity to see that. And in the same way we were talking about, putting Ted on the table, it's like, is this who you are? Is this who we are?
Mm.
And as harmful and challenging as, it has been in the second Trump administration to deal with the amplification of hate and the public nature of it. I was telling Maddie when she called from London a while ago, any of these statements years ago would have disqualified you from public life forever.
Yeah.
But, a couple of weeks ago, Megyn Kelly, who has been, in a bunch of big media spaces over the years, talked about Haitian refugees and basically talked about them as vermin. You don't bring us anything. You don't contribute to our culture.
Goodness.
And I have a good friend at Baylor, Ron Thomas, who writes about Haitian colonial history. And I don't think that people understand, like, this is the tiniest little, and this may be an offshoot, but it's also mythic because we think that Haiti is a terrible nation because it's black. It's governed by blacks, But Haiti is also a fellow democracy from early on in our shared histories. John Adams treated Haiti as a fellow democracy, and Thomas Jefferson treated it as a nation ruled by blacks. And for us to speak about people of color, to speak about immigrants, to speak about gay and trans people as though they are not human, I have to trust that there are enough people who know people of color and gay and trans people and may love those people. Because, this is the thing that changes people. It's why Jamar talks about relationship as the kind of intermediate but essential step.
Yeah.
And so my grandmother of blessed memory, Irene, spent 75 years in the Assemblies of God. She was a Pentecostal, charismatic, crazy conservative, spoke in tongues. My granddad used to, when he was in the spirit, would walk on the backs of the pews from the front of the church to the back. It terrified me.
Wow.
And she had such defined opinions. And then my dad got divorced. And then I got divorced. And because people she loved expanded the way she thought about these prejudices or opinions or faith commitments, she was able to move past it. And I think that's why relationship is so important. And it's why that chapter in my book about I have a black friend is seminal, because I have talked to so many people over the last 10 years who are like, I'm not racist because I have a black friend. But what they typically mean is I have a black employee, or I get served at Panda Express by a black woman, or, I flew next to a trans person on an airplane once. But when you know and you love somebody, you can't put them in that box,
Yeah.
And I grew up in a super homophobic Southern cultural conservative setting. And then I started meeting gay people and discovering that actually they were the most faithful Christians that I knew. And it just, it blew everything apart. So I hope that one of the things that this book would encourage people to do is first to confront the myths.
Yes.
And second, to build relationships. And then, as Kelly said, and as Jamar says in his kind of equation about how we become anti-racist, to build some commitments around that, whether it's financial, like, I'm not a wealthy person, but I have a voice and a platform and I'm good at words. I'm good at words, and I can use those words. And as I said, it's not a comfortable thing for me. But it's also, honestly, what are you called to do in this life? This is the darkest moment in my experience of American history. And I do not want my boys and girls to look at me and ask me, what did you do? How did you stand up? So that's what this book is. It's a work of advocacy and activism. It's also a meticulously sourced book. It's like 400 footnotes. It's like, I didn't make any of this stuff up.
It's well researched for sure. Yeah. Dr. Garrett, you've talked about a number of lies chapters, that you take on here already. I'm curious, which one was your personal favorite to write? And tell us a little bit about that. Maybe one you haven't touched on so far.
Oh, Josh, that's such a great question. Okay, let me look at the table of contents. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about chapter 4, because this is something that Dr. King was leaning in to at the end of his life. It wasn't just about race, it was also about economics. Yes. So chapter 4 is At Least We're Not Black. Whiteness, Blackness, and Caste. And Isabel Wilkerson has been one of my great mentors from afar as I think about the caste system and the way it's been played out around the world. What we have in America is a racial caste system.
Absolutely.
And so what Dr. King understood toward the end of his life, and I've actually spent some time at the LBJ Presidential Library here in Austin, taking a look at some of the material about Dr. King in LBJ's files. In 1968, LBJ was getting letters, telegrams, phone calls daily, calling Dr. King the most dangerous person in America. And part of that danger was that he was leaning into this idea that poor white people and people of color actually had so much more in common than poor white people and wealthy white people. And so what I love is strong, because this was such a hard book to write. And I can't say I love any of these conclusions because they are awful realities.
Yeah.
But there is this idea, which I understand as a person I'm not, incredibly privileged. I'm middle class. I've got a great job at Baylor. It's secure. I can't be fired. Thank God. But I have more in common with people of color, with immigrants, with people who are not at the top of the economic ladder, with people who don't fly in helicopters. I will never fly in a helicopter. And Dr. King understood that building this coalition was a thing that could reshape America. And so many white Americans with privilege saw that as dangerous. And there's actually, Josh, I'm so sorry to say this, but there's a letter from an Episcopal priest from Florida saying that Martin Luther King is the most dangerous man in America and he must be stopped in any way possible. So poor Southerners, poor white people, there is this racial caste system that's put in place where their concerns and their difficulties can be partially erased by saying, at least you're white. And so I've got a little bit of personal experience with this. When my mom and dad got divorced, we were flat out poor, and so there are 3, 4, 5 years of my life where I'm like, yeah, I can't afford that. I can't go to McDonald's. But to have this sense that race has been used as a way to deflect any of the concerns of poor white people and to encourage them to think of themselves as superior just because of their pigment. That was a chapter that I found really interesting to write at the same time that I see it continuing. So there are a lot of people with privilege, as Van Newkirk said, myth is the tool of the privileged to keep their privilege. But I think there are a lot of poor and lower middle class white evangelicals who lean into this superiority myth And when people ask me sometimes, I was telling Maddie in London that I'm on BBC a lot as a person whose opinions are mostly wrong. But people ask me why do people stick with Donald Trump even when they're economically disadvantaged? And the answer to that is because he has created a culture in which they can think of themselves as superior even while they're trying to decide whether they're going to buy a full tank of gas or fill their prescriptions.
Mm.
And so that myth, I think, is incredibly current for the present moment.
Yeah.
That, I don't know, 31, 32%. There is a substantial number of those people who will never desert Donald Trump, even as he makes their lives more difficult day on day on day.
Mm.
And just that permission structure and that ability to say, at least I'm not black.
Mm.
I'm not at the top of the ladder. It's very clear. I don't know how I'm going to make rent, but at least I'm not black.
Mm.
And that's something. And that, I mean, I see your reaction, and as I'm talking about it, it breaks my heart.
Yeah.
It is, it is so counter to all the things that you and I understand about who we're called to be and how we see each other as fellow children of God. But
it's good. It's good. I say in my work often, empires divide to conquer, but the way of Jesus unites to heal. And ultimately, Dr. King, what made him a threat was he was uniting poor working class white folks with black folks and showing both sets of neighbors that, hey, you both have more in common than empire has convinced you. And that is also going to be true today of immigrants as well as working class white folks who vote for Donald Trump. In fact, in so much of my research, and I'm going to be writing more about this on Substack, I've become convinced that what evangelical missionaries actually did for the American empire around the world was converting this bourgeoisie, civilized, middle class for capitalistic empires that would ultimately prop up Western empires and the extraction that they were doing through colonialism. And so much of global South evangelicalism, and I say this as someone born and raised in that tradition, introduced to Jesus in that tradition, but so much of that tradition, I think, is just there to protect the status quo for American empire, and that's what the global missions movement in the modern era, the post-colonial, colonial era, has certainly done. So, but thank you for drawing that connection and also talking about economics in this book, because that is what drives and fuels power, and we can't separate the racial conversation from the economic conversation. So, thanks for stewarding that too.
You're so welcome. And I've mentioned my friend Van Newkirk from the Atlantic. And he is one of those people who draws all these connections together, economics, the environment. And this would probably also kind of represent my chapter on segregation. People of color are typically pushed into places where they have economic, educational, vocational, like all of these disadvantages, and typically will run an interstate between us to confront and confirm that. But he is so good at writing about all these different elements of this. And I know that he's got a book that he's working on, and I would just encourage people, to pay attention. Van Newkirk. His work in the Atlantic is amazing. He's done a couple of really important podcasts. But he thinks a lot about all these different ways that that racism is manifested, not just in social status, but economical, environmental, educational, all these other ways. And one of the things that was a great joy for this book that was so hard to write was to be thinking about reading in conversation with often so many really important voices. I learned so much in the process of this book, And it's such a joy to be able to kind of synthesize and bring it out and talk to you and other people about it.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. No, and I know as a fellow author that you end up writing maybe 10% of what you research, if that. But there's a depth and wealth of wisdom that you carry, and folks, if you haven't bought your copy yet, I highly recommend getting your copy of White Lies. Dismantling 10 Cultural Myths About Race. Highly recommend this for reading and wrestling. And, Greg, tell us where folks can find you, your work, and where they can find this book.
Well, this book is on sale wherever great books are sold. I would prefer you not give your money to Jeff Bezos. So bookshop.org is a great online bookstore that supports independent bookstores. If you've got an independent bookstore in your community, please lean into that. You could also order it from Oxford University Press. Mm-hmm. And I am active on too many of the socials. And at Morgan, our agent, said, you need to start a Substack. So I am starting. I am several months into the Substack, and I'm leaning into race, religion, politics, and culture, which are all the things that I care about and write about. My Substack is called Good Trouble, after John Lewis of blessed memory. And one of the things that I try and do in that space and in most of my work is the preaching thing, which is like, okay, we've confronted this. So when you're released from this by the benediction, when you walk out that back door, what are some action items? What are you going to do? And so my big thing, I think, from now until the end of my life is going to be, how do we start good trouble?
That's incredible. Greg, thank you for joining us on Masala Chai Theology, for sharing your wisdom, and folks in the chat, thank you for your wisdom. And I see some former students here. Yeah, I see a former student here bragging about you, saying how you influence their teaching now, and we can trust your witness, especially on racial myths and racial wrestling. So anyway, thank you, Greg, for joining us. And folks, buy your copy of White Lies wherever you get your books. I'll also include a link in the show notes. Oh, thank you. Yeah, and the Justice of Jesus, too, if you haven't.
Also.
Blessings, Brother Greg. Take care.
Yeah. Thank you all.